Greetings! On this week's episode, I get to interview social justice educator, writer, and public scholar, Irene Sanchez. Check it out. Greetings, everyone. Welcome to the celebration. As you know, I am Tom Earl. It's an absolute pleasure to have you here with us today. We know you could be anywhere. And so the fact that you are here with us today, we appreciate that and we honor that. As you can see, it's not just me today. I am with the amazing, the brilliant Irene Sanchez. How's it going today?
Pretty good. How are you?
I'm doing awesome. Thank you so much. This is going to be an absolute treat for you all because Irene is a genius. You might have already seen her blog post that went viral where it talked about, what was the name of it?
It was called, I have a Ph.D. and I'm on welfare. So talking about the intersections of class, race, gender, as a woman of color in academia.
That's awesome. And so you might have already seen that. Irene is a social justice educator, writer, poet, and public educator. So a lot of the things we talk about on this podcast. So it's going to be awesome. Tell me a little bit about yourself. What you're passionate about, a little bit about your history that brought you here to this moment today.
So I always say that I'm a mother because my son is my life to me.
That's awesome.
I identify as Chicana, so I'm here from Southern California. Identify as Mexican American. Very strong ties to the social justice movement and aspect of what that identity means. And I ended up going on this path where I got a PhD. I'm trying to put it into use the best way I can to serve my community.
Yeah.
But when you're on the radical and left side of things, you find that sometimes to be challenging because you say things that academia doesn't like. And sometimes I think even the community will question your motives or motivations. So I think now it's not really so much a balancing act of that. I always prioritize activism over anything else because I think that's how we make real change. And over the years, I've been involved in different groups and organizations that are dedicated to social justice, immigrant rights, such as Autonomous Brown Berets of Watsonville, California, in Seattle, where I did graduate school. A lot of work around youth empowerment, ethnic studies. So being back in Southern California is like a really good thing for me, though.
That's awesome. Talk to me a little bit about, in the article you talked about how at first it didn't seem, or maybe I have a wrong perception, that academics was your passion.
I think at first I got into, this pathway, I think, because I thought, when I was in community college myself, I started out in a community college. So it's a very working class institution. It's a very, it's a lot of, where students of color have access, poor people, working class people have access through community college to get an education. So I went there and I got this idea in my head that I wanted to get a PhD, but I was failing out of college and, a lot of people told me I couldn't do it. And so then I did it. And I think I didn't really just have the support that people need to access these certain avenues. And you see a lot of the reproduction of things in higher ed, I guess I'll say, for lack of a better word, that elitism and all of that is kind of, it mirrors society. So it's kind of like, well, the person who's going to get this tenure track job or this really elite position, they have elite people backing them up to groom them for that. So I didn't really have access to that. And if I did, I might have rejected it in favor of being an activist or being in the community. And I know a lot of people after my article were like, well, you should stop your activism and go get a real job or, those sorts of things. Yeah, I had horrible comments, from people saying, they paid for me. And my response was to them, you got people in corporations getting these tax breaks that take more money than people who are on welfare and struggling. And the reality is the jobs just aren't there anymore like they used to be. So you have people like me competing, for these few tenure track positions. But then you also have people, at colleges and universities being adjuncts who are severely underpaid. So even if I am an adjunct, soon, hopefully I will be, but even if I am, I'll likely still be on welfare because of the way the system is set up. And it's so unfair to working people, to poor people, to women of color. And, it just kind of maintains that inequality over and over again as we go through generations.
So I had an incorrect perception then. So you, from the beginning, you wanted your Ph.D.
Yeah, I did.
That is amazing.
I don't know. Sometimes I'm like, oh, what was I thinking? But my whole thing was like, it was a tool to serve my community, right? And to give back. So I did return. 2015, I came back to, I kind of grew up in the IE, so the Inland Empire, Riverside, Rupa Valley. It's like these places out there in the middle nobody knows about. But that's where I grew up. And, you know, my folks were from East LA, though, so we move out there. It's cheaper housing. Mm-hmm. A lot of people commute. My father still commutes to his job in South Central. And, you know, I went back and it's just, I'm not the same. So I'm not going to fit in these structures that are very elitist or very hierarchical and like, you know, you must take the chain of command kind of thing. Yeah. And so because I pushed back against these things, I think it just didn't work out where I was working, and it was very unfortunate. And so now I'm just like, well, what else can I do? What can I do to serve my community still and to be of use for social justice, right? Because I think at the end of the day, we want to be able to serve others.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We talk about that a lot on this podcast, is when we feel the most alive.
Yeah, yeah. And that was part of my research, too. So that was the funny thing when people were saying these negative comments to me. They were like, well, what did she even write her dissertation on? And I wrote it on redefining achievement and success, because in our culture, right, in the U.S., it's like, you know, success is making that money. It's capitalism. So you have to have the house, you have to have the car, you have to have, like, you know, a certain amount of kids, and, you know, this whole, like, made up idea. And so I think what I try to do with my degree and with what I'm doing with my writing, at least, is challenging those ideas, challenging meritocracy too, challenging elitism. And I know maybe not all the people who are in academia are going to be in favor of that, because they want to keep that in place, because it kind of validates their position within that. And so it's hard to challenge that at the same time you're trying to just survive in this world.
You get a foot in the door. Yeah. So what did you learn about achievement and success then?
Well, I interviewed about 14 community college students, and they were in Washington State, so they identified as Latinx, so that's the gender-neutral term when you put the X at the end. And, you know, the students were saying, you know, success for them was, one woman was a DV survivor, so she survived domestic violence, and I remember her story so closely because I'm also a survivor, and it was around that time I was going through that. And so she said that her success, you know, she called it little stupid things, but they weren't. It was like she got a house or apartment, right? And she got her own couch from Goodwill, and she got a job, and she got a car, like a car that, not like a brand new car, but, you know, those were her things that made it possible for her to, like, imagine, you know, moving forward and keep going and persisting. Yeah. So it's not necessarily like an end point. That was another thing the students brought up, like success or achievement isn't like this end point. It could be the whole journey. And I think in this society, we're taught so much that it has to be like this end point, this like, I made $1 million or something. Yeah. And that is it. But once you reach there, then what? What do you have? And does money really define you? And I think when you talk to community college students, at least, you're talking to a very working class group of people, very poor people from all walks of life, all ages. Yeah. And that was the one that stuck out the most for me. There was another young man, I remember, he wanted to be like I think it was like an airplane mechanic. And his whole thing was too, you know, like success is like me kind of overcoming, he said, his own personal demons, because he had been addicted, you know, alcoholic and stuff like that. And he was pretty young. So for him, it just meant like overcoming those things, like making a better life for yourself.
That's wonderful.
And so, you know, there was many stories like that in the whole thing. And my document ended up being about 230 pages, I think. Yeah. And so I'm trying to do a book proposal right now to turn at least part of it into a book and expand on that achievement and success part. So that way other people can hopefully read it one day.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
What to you then is achievement?
To me, I feel like it's these like points along the journey, and I feel like in the everyday, it could be like having a good day with my son, for instance, you know, or it could be, you know, I wrote one thing today, and I think you have to recognize those things that people otherwise see as small, because you need to keep moving. Yeah. And I feel like sometimes, at least for me, like because of everything going on in the world, it's so easy to just get paralyzed by it and people are dealing with all sorts of personal challenges. And I feel like recognizing those small things, like I got up, I ate 3 times today, or, you know, just for a personal level, I feel like I'm able to give back more that way.
Do you think that has any relationship with gratitude?
I do, because I feel like when you recognize those things, and we aren't so hard on ourselves, because I feel like that's another thing too. I feel like sometimes we're too hard on ourselves, like in terms of at least, you know, trying to stretch ourselves too far. And I've given back a lot, I think, as an activist over the years, a lot of time, a lot of energy, and I'll keep doing it. But I think I also neglected to remember, not necessarily to take care of myself, but I think in some ways just to, you know, realize like I have my own issues to deal with. And I feel like years ago I used to hide in the work. Like, so I'm just going to drown myself in this work, and I'm just going to keep charging ahead like nothing's wrong, when, you know, I think a lot of people have personal things they need to deal with. So, you know, for me at least, you know, go seek help, like a therapist, go run, go like do something healthy for yourself. And I feel like with having my son, it's a little more challenging, but I think it's, you know, it's more urgent, I think, for me in that sense, because I'm caring for another human being. And so I mean, I feel like every day when I recognize those achievements, it's showing gratitude for what I'm accomplishing.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
So we talk a lot about achievement and success, and one of my critiques, though, of the leadership world is that it only talks about achievement and success, but removed from institutions of power and discrimination. It sounds like you kind of bring them together. Can you talk to me a little bit about achievement, success, but also its relationship in like systems of power and the way we've learned it through living in an institutionally racist society?
Well, I feel like that's what I think I was trying to push up against, even though I didn't realize I was doing it. I think myself going through school, I'm resisting that idea constantly that it has to be like, I need to get this job and I need to do this. And I'm just, there's something flawed with me as an individual if I don't, when in fact, I feel like when we look at it that way, we're not looking at how the systems are embedded with white supremacy or how they're embedded with, you know, racism, just at this very deep core level. So even if you see, you know, people maybe who look like you in a position of power, it doesn't mean that the system itself, like everything's solved, like it's gone. And I feel like a lot of us that go through that process in academia, it's kind of like, I write it in my blog, I'll say stuff, you know, because I write kind of how I talk. So like, let's not fool ourselves here. Let's not kid ourselves. You know, let's call it what it is. So pushing back against those ideas of meritocracy and really calling them as false, because I think when we kind of internalize, and I think a lot of people who go through academia do internalize it, and I had to fight to resist it, that, you know, somehow I'm special because I made it and you didn't. And it's like, no, it's not that. It's like there's a certain set of things that maybe led me here, right? But does that separate me that much from somebody who doesn't have formal schooling? And it doesn't make me better than somebody who doesn't have formal schooling. So my whole thing is like, how can we get into conversations with people, you know, but because academia forces these divides so much and this elitism, I feel like that's what separates us from like working together across all these different lines now.
Yeah. So you keep mentioning meritocracy. Tell me about it and its relationship to achievement, success in your work.
Meritocracy in particular, I feel like it's just false, and it makes the students, like when you're talking about students at least, it makes them feel like if they failed out of like a class or out of school or had to go to alternative school, like it's their fault. And it's not a systemic issue. It's like, no, you are flawed as an individual. You are flawed because, you know, you come from this culture, you come from this background, or you're poor. And it criminalizes people, I feel like. So people are like, oh, it's a good thing, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. And I'll write about that too. I'm like, well, you don't have boots to begin with. How are you going to pull yourself up? Yeah. You know, it's not an equal playing field like everyone says. And my whole critique with education, at least, is that people say education is this great equalizer, but I feel like that's becoming less true as time has gone on, because you know, you have graduates with BAs, masters, all these credentials now, right? Yeah. And they can't get jobs. And so it's like, how can it be that then? And I feel when we buy into that, when we keep reinforcing that it's like this individualistic endeavor, I think that's also separates us as people from working together to seeing how, no, we need to like tear down the system and like, you know, create something new.
And what's meritocracy, though, just for folks who are like, I think I get it, but what is that?
I think the best way to explain it is like, you got somewhere on your own merits. You pulled yourself up, that whole, I think it was Horatio Alger, I think his name is, and you pulled yourself up by your bootstraps. You did it all on your own. It kind of goes in line with the American dream. You did it. It's very American, I feel.
If you just work hard enough.
If you just work hard,
everything.
Anything. That's
Look
in
at
your
Obama.
past. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That's like at the max level, and I feel you get that so much in higher education or just in the education system. And I think people forget, like they say, okay, it's this great equalizer, and at the same time, it's like, you're getting these ideas of what it means to be an American through that the narrative of what it means and these ideas, and it's ingrained in us, especially the longer you've been in the U.S. educational system. I think the more you might buy into it.
Okay, so you brought up then you're an educator.
Yes.
Talk to me a little bit about where that came into and your relationship with it, how it influences your life and your work.
I feel like it always does. I started off working with youth, I feel like, that were like me growing up. So youth that maybe struggled. So in high school, I didn't do well. I barely graduated high school. And then when I went to community college, I got kicked out my first year for my bad grades. So they kick you out for a year. And so my whole thing was I wanted to help students who looked like my friends in high school, you know what I mean? Who looked like me, and reach out to them. So I've worked with youth in migrant education. It was over in Monterey County. I've worked with youth that were formerly incarcerated or involved, had already been in the juvenile justice system, or I don't like to call it juvenile justice because it's not really justice, right? But who have been
camps.
Yes. And so, I always make sure to work with youth that need it the most. And I remember a turning point for me, at least, was when I was a college advisor over in Watsonville, California. And I was at a high school, and it was the first college center they had. And my boss told me, go recruit some freshman high school students. So I was like, okay. And she didn't really give me direction how to do it. So I kind of just used my little organizer head mode. Yeah. And I tried to see who was on campus, the resources. And I found a group who work with young men in gangs. And I was like, well, they brought 30 people to come meet with me. And I ended up signing up 10 of these young men to be in the program. And I remember after that, my boss was really mad. And she was like, those weren't the students I told you to recruit. And I'm like, yes.
Wow.
And I was like, well, these are the students who need it. Like, I can't tell them no. Like, how do you know this person who looks like this or dresses like this or maybe has a certain background? How do you know they don't have like a 3.5? Yeah. And even if they don't have a 3.5, who says that we can't help them if they are seeking it? Yeah. And so that's, some of the small ways in which I think that happens kind of like every day at different high schools across this country. Like, we talk about racial profiling in the media, but I mean, it happens, or, on the streets, it happens in the school systems too, about who is deserving of an opportunity and who is not. And so I've always kept working with youth. I really feel passionate about ethnic studies too, about Chicano studies, about African American studies, Asian American studies. There's a slide I remember. It's like, why is it, U.S. history is, U.S. history, right? And then ethnic studies, everything other than that. And so, I don't know, I just want to keep teaching, I think. So I'm going to try to get back into that. And that's what I've been trying to do. And so I'm just trying to figure out the best way to go back to it. Because it's really, I do it in the community for youth. I do it when I teach poetry. When we do presentations, like me and my partner, we do presentations to students. And so I feel like when you do presentations, it's like a small version of teaching, but I really want to be back in a classroom.
What does education look like to you?
Ooh, I always feel like education can happen anywhere. And there was something I always reminded myself in graduate school, how education, is outside these walls of this ivory tower. Like, it's not just here, it's kind of everywhere if you want to open up your mind to it. You can learn from people just in your day-to-day if you're open to it, I feel like. And so it's learning about life, it's learning about the people around you in the world, and what that means. And I think the well-being of each other. And I think that's something that's lost when you're learning through the education system as it is. Yeah. Because we don't think about anyone else really but ourselves. Or that's how I feel they teach us, at least.
Is there any sort of educational process that you are passionate about? Like when you're the teacher in the room?
I think the thing that kind of stuck with me that I try still is popular education. So from Paulo Freire, the Brazilian educator, I think that worked well in organizing. It's a challenge to implement in a classroom. It depends on the class, but I think I still try to do elements of that and to get away. You know, there's a book that he wrote, and in one of the chapters, it's called The Banking Concept of Education, kind of like where you treat students like a trash receptacle and like, here's this information and like, these are what I'm saying are facts and they might not be the whole truth. And you're just kind of throwing the trash into the student's head.
Yeah.
And so I try to make sure when I teach to get away from that. And it's very difficult because I feel we're conditioned.
Yeah.
But, you know, having students kind of set up to talk to each other in groups and kind of do group projects, even though a lot of people are anti that. I mean, you have to talk to each other, and that gets away from it being this individualistic endeavor. So how are you learning if you're not even talking to your neighbor?
And we all have a strength that we bring to the classroom.
Yes.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Is it similar to experiential learning?
I would say in some regards, yeah. I remember at school there was a group who kind of like did that, and I'm like, sometimes when people throw out these new concepts and terms, I'm like, I think we've been doing that already. Yeah. So, you know, on my website it says public scholar, and it was interesting during my time at the university I was at where we had a public scholarship program, and I was in it. I was one of the first students, and I critiqued them though the first month I think we were there. It's this public scholarship program, and I think I was one of the only students of color in that cohort. And it's to get a certificate, and it's a humanities-based program. And I remember some of the students were complaining why we had to have a race conversation.
Wow.
Yeah, and I was like, and one of them said, well, I got bored. It was like at a conference we had to go to, and they were like, well, I got bored, so I just got up and I left.
Wow.
And it was our debrief, and I raised my hand, and I was like, no, you can't just do that, because I said right now and most time when we meet, I'm uncomfortable, and I can't just get up and leave. So you need to sit there and be uncomfortable because you're going to learn something. And a lot of times I struggled, I think, with that concept of a public scholar or public scholarship, because I feel like in communities of color, women of color especially, and even, you know, men of color who are professors, a lot of us have already been engaged in our communities. Like, we feel it's our responsibility. And so I'm like, is this just another name for community engagement or for like caring about your community and like feeling a responsibility? And I feel like it is. I feel like it was a way for public scholarship is a way for for white folks to kind of like, okay, now we're going to do community work and we're going to define what it is instead of it coming from the people like that they're trying to work with. And it's not even really like and so that's a power relationship. It's not like they're really trying to work with them. They're trying to just like plop in, let me get what I get from you, and then get out.
I want to be the Freedom Writers teacher.
That's exactly what it is.
I want that movie scene.
That's exactly what I think it felt like. You know, and I still use the term just because I'm going to probably write something about that one day. It was something that was lingering from that program where it's like public scholarship. I'm like, we've been doing it. It's called community engagement. You know, it's just kind of like the white folks wanted credit for it at that point, whereas we've been doing it with no credit. So people that are professors in universities, you've seen these old school Chicanos, right? I'm like, they don't get credit for doing extra. You know, there's a lot of famous like professors that I know of their work, women of color, usually Black women who are doing that kind of work already. And it's like, how are they getting compensated or credit or some special, you know, recognition for doing work because they care like about their community, about the public. And so it's troubling for me, but just trying to like break that stuff down and kind of demystify it too for the public. Because I feel like when you're in it, you kind of know and you see it, but then I think there's certain things set in place where a lot of people, even if they know it, they still uphold it because, you know, it gives you that divide again from like, this is why I'm special and I have a Ph.D. or I'm in this position and this is why, you know, you are down there. And it's like, that's not the way we should be moving about in this world, I think, especially in these times.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And what do you mean by these times?
Well, these times where, you know, I feel like people don't call it what it is. There's people that do more so now, but white supremacy is, white terrorism, which was, just in August 12th where, Charlottesville happened, University of Virginia. But I feel like that's all these incidences where you're seeing this has been happening already. It's just now it's so much more. This era of Trump, I feel like it's just getting worse. So, because I feel like a lot of this stuff has been kind of like, slowly simmering, right? And then all of a sudden now it's like the pot is overflowing, like it's boiling over. And I feel this isn't the time to be like, oh, well, maybe they didn't mean it that way, or maybe it was this. And it's like, no, just call it what it is, because how are we going to confront anything when we're not honest about what it is to begin with? And it's a little bit of like concerning these times, but hopefully there's opportunity for people to organize and rise up.
Yeah, I would agree. And I know you wanted to share a poem.
Yeah, the young woman who was killed, and I had wrote this poem about women actually in Latin America, but I think it just was speaking to me because she was standing up against white supremacists. She was a white woman and standing up against the white supremacists, and it's just unfortunate what happened. And I feel like a lot of the stuff is going to keep going unchecked. But this was originally for women of Latin America. Berta Cáceres, who is in Honduras, for example, fighting against water. So just the different ways in which women fight. And so it's called We Will Not Compromise. Fighting to be heard, fighting to be seen, fighting the powers that be. Resisting patriarchy, resisting misogyny, resisting the attempts made daily to silence me. Resisting the attempts made daily to silence us. Battling oppression with head down, slowly learning how to rise, standing in beauty with 1,000 ancestors on my side. No, I will not, we will not compromise. Solidarity with women, solidarity with workers around the world, we strike from where we stand. We are matches lighting flames, and the suppression we burn to the ground, may the fire light the way. To a tomorrow, for a tomorrow, so we have a tomorrow. May our tomorrow shine brighter every day.
That snap?
Yeah. It's a little longer. It gets me so emotional because a lot of times I feel like women are the ones holding down a lot of causes, holding it down in our homes, holding it down in so many ways as mothers, as workers, and, just to see what happened to her and what happens to women all over the world is just so, it's hard.
Biggest leaders who get the least credit.
Yes. and that's kind of the way it always is. And, hopefully, battling patriarchy and battling misogyny. And that's why it's important to call things out as they are, So when we're talking about white supremacy, I think it's important to be specific.
Yeah.
Bell Hooks, famous author, writer, she wrote about how she called it the white supremacist. I think she adds in like heteropatriarchy,
white
right?
Supremacist, capitalist patriarchy.
Yeah, and capitalism. So she calls it all in there,
Yeah.
And I think it's important to do that because it's specific. It's targeted because white male violence is a thing. And that's where this terrorism is coming from. And I think people don't want to say it.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, if we don't talk about it, it's never going to get confronted. So I think it's important that we do call it out. We continue to call it out and we continue to challenge it.
Yeah, the power of naming.
Yeah.
Even when we talk about like emotional intelligence or something like that, if you can't name the fear or the emotion, then how are you ever going to go after it?
Yeah, and there's no way to confront it. There's no way to target it. There's no way to fight it. Whatever words you want to choose, there's no way to even go after it if you can't even talk about it, and especially publicly. And I think we'll see more of that, though, coming in the next months because, it's becoming impossible to ignore it.
I heard you mention before we started that you, correct me if I'm wrong, identify as feminist?
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about what that means to you.
Well, I think for me it's meant it's more to me than just like, okay, I want equality with men. It's like, no, I want equity. I want all my sisters to rise, and not just sisters like SIS, like sisters, like all women, including trans women. It includes everybody. And for me, it's important to recognize that because I feel in challenging all of these misogyny and patriarchy, it affects all people who identify as women and people even who are on the spectrum and of gender. And so to me, it's inclusive of that. It's also inclusive in terms of men. I feel like raising a boy now, you know, these ideas of patriarchy, masculinity, I feel like they get ingrained so young. And it's not even coming from me. It's like people, you know, just like, oh, look at your little boy, or like, you know, you go into a store and you see shirts like mommy's little man or something. I'm like, no, he's a little boy. You know, let him be a boy, and like he's not supposed to cry, right? And I couldn't believe after I had him how young that gets ingrained. So for me, like, how do I raise a son to be feminist too? And I'm trying to grapple with that right now. Like, what does that look like, and who can I turn to? And it's like really not really what books you could read, because I feel like that doesn't help, like, because I don't even know where to begin. But for me, at least, a lot of the activism around women had started from like gender violence and talking about that. So when I was in community college, I became a rape crisis counselor, and I also Eve Ensler has that play, The Vagina Monologues, and she does this V-Day campaign. And so I was the first one to bring that to my community college campus back in 04 and 05. And it was raising money for the DV shelter and for the Rape Crisis Center. So all of that work has always been a part of my life. So more than just like violence against women, I look at it more now like as gender-based violence. And what does that mean? So it includes more people, because as I went through school, I feel like it's just been that common thread, not because like it's my research interest, it's just part of who I am, I feel like. And so when I was finishing graduate school, I ended up getting my certificate in feminist studies. And, you know, not to be like, oh, look, I have a certificate in feminist studies, so now I'm a feminist. No, I've always been this way. So, you know, for me, being in that department, I think it saved me during grad school, because my College of Education wasn't really supportive. So feminist studies and the professors in that department really gave me a home when there was no safe space, you know, in the institution. Like you found a little pocket of it, you know, in that department. I think it was like 2 professors in particular. One of them, she was on my committee. And on my blog on Chicana Ph.D, there's a letter to my academic mama. And that's actually going to be coming out, or it just did come out in Inside Higher Ed. And so people are, you know, looking at that and kind of like, well, what does that mean, these safe spaces in academia, and who creates them? And most of the time they're created by women of color, I feel like, when you find them. So feminism just to me it's everything. Like, you can't have a movement without having people who believe in equality for everyone and to ending gender-based violence. And so one of the books recently too, I think it's listed on my website, that I was in recently, it's called 100 Latinas Write Against Gender-Based Violence. So it's called Basta. So Basta means enough. And it was a project that a professor at University of Nevada, Reno started. She's Chilean, so it was out of a radical Latin American women's struggle. So Basta. So that was a project ongoing in Latin America, and she brought it to the U.S. So I'm in that book.
That's awesome. Congratulations.
Yeah, thanks.
On that note, can you tell us a little bit about your writing and, you know, your journey as a writer?
Oh, it's been off again, on again. A lot of that is because I had my son, I feel like. But even before that, I stopped writing at various points in my life, and I always tried to I question why, and I always felt bad, you know, and I'm like, well, I'm going to school and I'm doing this. And I think a lot of times when I teach writing workshops now to young women in particular, I feel like we get afraid of our own voice. Like, we get afraid of speaking out, because I feel like for women, it has so many consequences in this society. So I try to catch myself doing that, because I think it still happens. So I started writing again. You know, I thought I was done. 2012, I had my son, and I was like, I'm not writing again.
Wow.
Like, how can I, right? Like,
sounds like holding your breath.
Like, how can I do this? And kind of like a year after I had him, so some of my friends knew, like, okay, she writes kind of, whatever. And so they started sending me these proposals, these calls for papers, and they weren't academic presses or anything like that. And I was like, okay, well, I guess I'll give it a try. And it kind of helped me. Like I explained, I was in a DV situation at some point, and so it kind of helped me get over that. And I was like, okay, let me try. And so the first thing was like this Poetry on Buses campaign in Seattle, where They were putting poems on buses, and then it got picked, and I got
That's
paid like
awesome.
$25. I was like, hey, cool, I can take my son out, right?
Yeah.
And then I submitted to this other anthology that was called Single Mothers Speak on Patriarchy. And then I got into that, and that barely came out last year too, because it takes a while to get published. And so I've just kept writing ever since then. And now I have like a pretty long list of, publications in a short amount of time. And I was kind of like, whoa, I'm doing it. And so it feels good. I recently got back from Rochester, New York, where I was at a writing retreat, people of color, mostly women of color. And it's called The Pink Door. And it was a really moving experience to be around such fierce energy and like just beautiful people who I think, like I was saying about that comfort zone earlier, you have to kind of put yourself outside of that sometimes and go somewhere new and like challenge yourself. And for me, it was like leaving my son the first time. And it was really hard. It was really challenging. But then at the end, I just feel so much better as a person and have this support network with me that I carry them with me all the time. And it's just an amazing experience to have like a group of people of color in particular, like, they got your back. And so I feel good as a writer. I feel like there's projects coming up and events where, we'll share more and stuff. And I think for me, moving forward, the biggest thing I have is probably like how to be more public with it in terms of like reading, because I feel like it's still a struggle. And like I said, I think that has to do with the way we're conditioned women in our voices. And, I think a lot of times it's not seen as valuable when it is, we have just as much, to say, I think. And so I'm going to work on that for myself, but also to the young people that I encounter when I do workshops. I think it's important for them to know like their voice is important, and for young girls especially to know that they don't have to justify what they say to anybody.
That's wonderful. I know for me, my greatest teachers, my biggest epiphanies and breakthroughs have always come from women educators. So I 100% agree with you. Is there anything you want to add that we didn't get a chance to talk about?
I don't think so.
Okay, we did a good job covering it. Awesome. Where can folks reach out to you, connect with you, thank you, tell you how awesome you are, and, absorb your resources?
You can go to my website. Okay. I have a few of them, but I think the main one, go to www.irenesanchezphd.com. From there, you can get to Chicana PhD. You can get to the Southwest Political Report. And pretty soon I'm going to put my poetry and writing blog back up, because there's 3 different projects. So I have many different things that I'm doing, and that's one-stop shop though. Okay,
wonderful. And as always, all the show notes, you've seen it up here the whole time, tomearl.com/Irene. And you can check all that out. All the links that she mentioned are going to all be in there. So that's your quick go-to if you need to. So just want to thank you so much. This has been absolutely amazing. You talk about so many things that we're passionate about here: feminism, education, achievement, its intersection with power, all these things. It's been awesome.
Yeah, it was so great to meet you in person.
Same here. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And we want to thank you for listening, for sharing your energy with us. Please let Irene know how much you appreciated this. Let her know, send the energy. It really means a lot. You might think that one person saying, I really appreciate it, wouldn't make a difference, but it really does. So please let her know. And as always, folks, we appreciate it. We're wishing you peace and blessings. Thank you. We did it! Yay. Boom!